Welcome to the first session of our Islam for Critical Thinkers webinar series. Today, we begin this journey with a very beautiful and a powerful topic that is purpose, virtue, and knowledge in Islamic theological perspective. I think a discussion that returns us to the question why we are here for and what we are here for. We are honored to have with us a deeply respected and accomplished guest, Ustad Hafiz Naveed Idris, OBE, and a man whose life reflects the very values we're here to explore. He is Hafiz of the Quran, with studies in Arabic and Islamic sciences that he completed in Damascus. Academically, he holds an LLB honors, an MA in religion and education in contemporary society, and more. He is an award winning head teacher of the year in 2019 and a district commissioner joined for Halifax. In recognition for his outstanding services in education, he was awarded an OBE in 2020. He also serves as a council member for the British Board of Scholars and Imams, and also his scholarly contributions. He has translated the argument. We are honored to begin this series with someone who not only talks about purpose and virtue, but lives it in classrooms, in communities, and especially in spiritual circles. Without further delay, I invite Ustad Naveed to begin today's session. Bismillah, over to you, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope you're well. So, inshallah, I wanted to start off with looking at the definition of purpose or teleology. So, this idea of purpose has roots in history, and the philosophers of the past, the ancient philosophers, the Greek philosophers, the Muslim philosophers, everybody has had this concept of teleology, or there is purpose behind existence and creation. So Farah, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to be looking at what is teleology and understanding teleos in the Islamic thought, and also how it differs from the Greek thought. And I'm going to be using some Quranic ayahs as the basis of purpose and teleology, which cover the idea of ihsan and bir, and we will explain more about those terms in a moment. And the third thing we're going to be looking at is analyzing our assumptions that we hold about the world, about the dominant paradigm of materialism, and that the physical is the only real thing that exists, and everything that is non-physical is not real. And so I want to explore some of those assumptions that we make. So the assumption of materialism, also the assumption of existentialism, that it is humans who define and decide their purpose, as opposed to revelation. And lastly, we're going to be looking at some problems, examples of teleological thinking in everyday life and from different domains of existence. Okay, for our next slide, please. So let's begin with the core ayah, which I want to focus on, is 23:115, which talks about the word. It talks about, did we create you for without a purpose? And so this idea that human beings have a purpose is fundamental to revelation, and without this, we struggle to find meaning in human life. I mean, what is the point of human existence? We're born, we die, and then that's it, we don't exist anymore. If that is the case, if that is the only purpose, it's absolutely a meaningless existence. And this is what has terrorized philosophers in the past, that what is the meaning or purpose of life? And we are such fragile creatures. We are born and we just chase certain things, and then we die, and that's it. We're long buried, forgotten, and disappear. So this materialistic kind of idea of life, of existence, it creates a sense of worry and anxiety, being for being a human being. And secondly, that anxiety and worry is filled by ideas that we can then decide what we want to do. So, I mean, this goes back to philosophers such as Nietzsche, the German philosopher who said God is dead. And what that means is that humans now are the benchmark of right and wrong. Humans decide what they want to do. There's no other benchmark for existence. So that first ayah, God tells us that actually there is purpose, and we can broaden this. This idea of purpose applies to everything. Even in science, we talk about function. We talk about cells have a function. Everything in an organism has a function, and basically, function is purpose. It is a modern word for purpose. So everything has a function, and if that cell or organism or entity doesn't fulfill its function, then it is failing in certain ways. It detracts from that thing's perfection if it doesn't fulfill its function. And so this idea of function is very important. And then it brings us back to this question of what is the function of a human being? To put it in scientific terms, what is the function? What is the purpose of human beings? So we are endowed with such amazing powers of imagination, of intellect, of creativity. We can build aspirations and hopes and dreams that can fill the entire universe, but yet we're such small, insignificant creatures. So this idea of purpose, God created us for a purpose. And if you look at the history of human existence on Earth, you know, human beings like us with our psychological and spiritual makeup have only been around for about 70,000 years. And really, only about 50,000 years ago, do you find humans talk about um, images, afterlife, have rituals, and the kind of humans that are like us. So if you look at the history of creation, humans have only been on Earth less than half a second, compared to if the Earth was 1 day old, the history of the Earth was 1 day. We're not even less than, a few seconds. So this ability that we have, and yet the ability to destroy and create, we're such a powerful being. Yeah. Um, and then the second ayah I want to look at is the ayah from Al Imran, which talks about الذين يتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا. So God talks about the believers that they reflect on the creation of heaven and the earth. And so this is the empirical part. This is the observation part that science does. But then they reach a conclusion that says, رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. You did not create all of this in vain or without purpose. So our reflection on creation leads us from observing the world to reaching the conclusion that actually all of this isn't created without purpose. There is a really clear purpose behind this. Okay. So the ayah, it invites us to kind of reflect and ponder, but move beyond. So when we take the modern scientific approach, we don't focus on why. We only explain the what. And this ayah tells us, actually, let's talk about the why as well. We were talking about just the proximal cause. So it's like, the pen writing, and we only see the pen writing, but we can't see the human being holding the pen, writing who's the real cause behind the pen. So this surface level idea that you only observe the proximal causes and ignore the ultimate cause is something that this ayah encourages to focus on. So you notice things and you realize actually there has to be some intelligence, some consciousness, some force behind all of this, and it has to be an entity that has thought, that has intelligence, that has reasoning, and that has thinking, and all of this is there. And the issue we have is in our current thinking is that we acknowledge that there is order in the universe. We acknowledge the mathematical accuracy of the universe, but we refuse to acknowledge that there is some power or force that is behind that. So we attribute consciousness and volition to cells. I mean, cells can't decide what to do. Cells don't have willpower or thinking or volition. So we attribute this volition to cells, and rather than actually opening up. Um, and the reason why we struggle with this is because we make the assumption that only the physical exists, and that the only way to have knowledge is through observation. And if we do that, then we limit our understanding. So therefore the need of revelation. So without revelation, we are going to be just wandering in the dark. Okay. So that's the second ayah. The third ayah I want to focus on is وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. So Surah 51, ayah 56. And this ayah takes us closer to our goal today, to look at the purpose of existence. So God says, I did not create man and jinn except for worship. And I want to expand on this meaning of the word worship, and worship as alignment with the values and the core attributes of God, such as justice, such as compassion, and fairness. And so these attributes of God is we take on the imprint of the attributes of God. And the word abada comes from at-tariq al-mu'abbada, a well-trodden path, and the well-trodden path takes the imprint of the feet that walk on it. In a similar way, we take on the imprints of God's attributes and qualities, and we align ourselves with them. So God explains in this ayah that our purpose is to take on the divine attributes that God has chosen for us, and that is why God created us, to reflect those attributes. And the last ayah which I want to focus on today is the ayah in Surah Al-Mulk, which talks about why God created us, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, so that he may test which one of us is the most beautiful in conduct. And that ayah is absolutely amazing, because it explains that God says he created life and death and gave us time on this earth, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ, so that he may test which one of us is the most beautiful in conduct. And the word is used is ihsan, beauty. And ihsan, again, it's the definition of ihsan is that you worship God as though you can see him, and if you can't do that, as that he can see you. So this idea of our purpose is to bring beauty into the world, to see the real cause behind everything, that God is the cause behind everything. Okay, Farah, can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so in terms of critical thinking, there are certain assumptions we need to explore. So assumptions of secular materialism. So the first one is that it regards humans as just machines, biological machines. And therefore, it removes this idea that we have a non-physical aspect, and we have any purpose other than just fulfilling the function of a machine and driven by whatever takes our fancy. As opposed to that, in Islamic teleology, we regard humans as Khalifas of God on earth, and they are representing God on earth, and they are fulfilling God's values and God's purpose on earth to bring about beauty and goodness on earth. So we have a responsibility. So being human frames our responsibility in terms of we are guardians, we are representing God. So a deputy represents the boss, and so we're representing the creator, and this elevates our purpose. So therefore we find our values, our criteria doesn't come from ourselves, but from revelation. But what we find is that Reasoning allows us to get closer to that. We can find the general idea, but the details are then confirmed via revelation. No human beings will be able to work out the details, and therefore you have disputes and disagreements. And the only way to resolve disputes and agreements within humans is to have a non-human source. And in that sense, revelation then affirms our researchers and confirms what we've been following. So the second assumption is that there is no intrinsic purpose to humans. Yeah, it's whatever we make of our lives. We give meaning to our lives. And in Islamic theology, we know that life is a test. So life is a test, and Allah created us. And this is really important because um, if we don't believe life is a test, and we have this idea of happiness, and then when problems occur, we don't know how to deal with it. So recognizing that the life is a test gives us the rules of the game. If you know the rules of the game, that actually tragedy, calamity, disaster, and trials and tribulations are all part of the test. And this test is part of a longer time frame, not just our earthly time frame, the moment we're born and the moment we die, but the time frame we had an existence before we were born, and we're going to have an existence after we're born. We're going to continue. So our spiritual self had an existence before our physical earth presence on earth, and it will carry on as well. And that assumption changes the way we deal with tragedy and disaster on earth, because we know that any injustice or wrong that we suffered, we will get compensated for it. And we know that justice will be done. And if not on earth, but we have definitely known on the day of judgment that justice will be done. This idea allows us to have peace and to remain content, and it allows us to deal with the emotional trauma of loss and suffering, that we know that God will compensate us for that. So that's a very fundamental distinction between a secular materialistic view of the world and the Islamic teleos that the life is a test. And thirdly, in secular materialism, we believe ethics is what humans agree is a social construct. So it's the social contract. Society agrees to have this. They have this contract with each other, and we have imposed this. But in the Islamic teleology, from a revelation perspective, ethics comes from our divine fitrah. It is in part of our DNA. It is ingrained within us. So this idea of human fitrah, of upholding compassion, of fairness, of justice, um, kindness, helping the vulnerable, social justice, these are all part of fitrah. And when humans see suffering, uh, they feel the pain, the empathy and sympathy. We feel that, and that is deeply rooted within our human nature, within our fitrah. And the Islamic approach builds on this. So it's a completely natural and a universal approach to ethics. And the last assumption that we have is that knowledge equals power. Um, and we can see that how knowledge is used to exploit both the physical resource of the world and also the human resources and people and nations. The whole history of colonialism shows that knowledge is power. Knowledge is used to create weapons, to create systems that ensure certain countries or certain people are unable to benefit from their own produce. So knowledge is used as power. But Islamic teleology, knowledge is a way of getting closer to God. Knowledge is a way of living the best life, of a life of taqwa, of God consciousness, of mindfulness. And this knowledge allows us to work out that actually um, there is a non-physical world, which has been confirmed by revelation. And so having this knowledge gives us absolute certainty about the non-physical world, about the ghaib. And this knowledge also tells us that actually there is going to be a next life, there is going to be justice. So accountability is very, very important. So in terms of critical thinking, um, this is a very important slide in terms of looking at assumptions that we make and asking yourself, when I'm looking at a theory or philosophy or some conduct or looking at an event, what are the assumptions that I'm operating at? So if we notice, a calamity or disaster, how do we respond? How do we approach? So, for example, arms sales, selling weapons to other countries. Now, would we would we stop selling weapons if we change ethics that actually human life is more important, is sacred, or is profit more important? And if our idea is knowledge is power, and we decide what the human good is, then we'll say, okay, we don't want our economies to suffer. So therefore, what we'll do is human life isn't important, where we don't want our profits to suffer. So we can justify doing this. And there's an interesting parallel in the Quran, um, when where in Surah Al-Tawbah, where God talks about when the mushrikeen were prohibited from entering Mecca, that don't fear economic loss. So sometimes principles of human life and value and truth, they overcome the idea of just profit and exploitation. So these assumptions are in play in every aspect of life. So when you watch the news, every story, the way nations behave, the way individuals behave, these assumptions are there. Okay, for our next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay. So we talked a little bit about purpose, and God talks about the purpose of life that we um, uh, achieve beauty in this world. Ayyukum ahsanu amala. Who does the most beautiful actions, the best actions that you do? So this idea of bringing beauty into the world, adding value, has been around for a long time. Um, Aristotle called it eudaimonia. What is the best life? What is the good life? And the definitions of a good life. And so the purpose of existence is to live the best life that you can live. Okay, to live the good life, a life that is full of virtue and character. So this virtue ethics is a fundamental part, and many human systems, including the Greek philosophers, they developed huge philosophies around this. But sadly, in modern times, the idea of virtue ethics has disappeared in favor of just profit, greed, exploitation, because we don't see humans as real humans anymore. We just see them as objects that we can exploit. So this idea of virtue ethics, so it bridges the gap between what is the purpose of human existence, and the purpose is to live a good life. And how do you live a good life? Is by developing certain types of virtues. And the Quran talks about this as ihsan, the virtue of ihsan, of achieving excellence. And the other word that the Quran talks about is bir, the highest pinnacle of spiritual achievement. And the Quran defines bir in a very lengthy verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, and it talks about that bir excellence isn't just ritual worship, turning to the east or turning to the west, but bir is believing in God in the unseen world, in the ghaib, and benefiting others, helping others, remaining steadfast in times of calamity and disaster. And so this idea of virtue ethics is absolutely fundamental part of who we are. So what is the purpose of existence? The purpose of existence is to live a good life, and that good life can only be achieved through developing certain virtues. And the second concept of this is wasatiyya. We take the middle path. We take the golden mean, not the extremes, not too little or not too less, too much, and balanced conduct. And part of the idea of virtue in the Quranic concept is that it's not just an intellectual thing. It's not something we talk about. It becomes part of our habit. It becomes like part of our memory. This is how we habitually act, and it changes us. So rather than our conscious effort, it becomes part of who we are. So I want to link this idea of teleos, that the purpose of human existence is to develop virtues. And I mentioned in the opening, some of these virtues are God's attributes. And these attributes are the most common ones are justice, compassion, um, and nurturing other people, Rab, the idea of Rab, nurturing other people. Um, and then this also brings us then to this idea of um, the higher purposes of Islamic law, the maqasid al-Sharia. You know, whenever we're analyzing something, whenever we're looking at something, what object is that thing achieving? Is it fulfilling certain roles? So, for example, is it fulfilling the idea of preservation of faith? So we allow people to develop their own thinking, to arrive at their own conclusions, and this preservation of faith can only happen if we create the conditions of critical thinking. Otherwise, people can get swayed by propaganda. They can get swayed by influencers, by social media. So it's really important that to preserve faith, we need critical thinking, especially in this day and age, in the post-truth world. How do we preserve that? And this idea of developing critical thinking. And critical thinking isn't just analyzing premises and conclusions and outcomes. It's also looking at the assumptions that are driving that thinking. So the assumptions of materialism, are we only believing in the physical world, or is the assumption of the ghaib, the akhirah, the next world built into that concept? Secondly, the idea of existentialism, that human beings can decide uh, what they want, so they are the benchmark of right and wrong. And again, actually, is that built into that mechanism of that philosophy, that theory, or are we clear that actually this is a human constructed idea? So let me give you an example, like the DSM, the manual that's used to diagnose mental illnesses. Prior to 1973, homosexuality was regarded as a mental illness. But then after 1973, it changed. What happened? There was no scientific discovery that led to the change. It was activism. So there was a lot of pressure and a lot of activism. People wanted this to change, and therefore the definition changed. So the ideological and the political aspect of theories and philosophies and approaches is something that we need to develop as critical thinkers. Okay, so not just logical thinking, but also what are the assumptions behind that? So the one of the key things is about purpose. So are we preserving faith? Preservation of faith. That's one of the fundamental maqasid of Sharia. Preserving life. So is this activity or this theory or this entity or this event or this AI approach, is it preserving life? Is it preserving in intellect? Is it preserving family? And is it preserving wealth? So Islam has given us a framework to analyze and evaluate beliefs, practices, systems that are they achieving the five main purposes of preservation of faith, preservation of life, of intellect, of progeny, and of wealth. And sometimes, certain discoveries or certain inventions or certain approaches are harmful to all of these things. And so they might be promoted and pushed because they lead to a profit, they lead to control over people, but are they benefiting? Okay, so let's next slide, please. Okay, so we've kind of talked a little bit about this. So just very briefly on this. So secular assumptions, one, science, free will is an illusion. And actually, because it denies the ruh, and we are metaphysical beings. Okay, and that's a very important assumption. We always, our essence is non-physical, is metaphysical, which is the ruh, and everything then follows from that. Secondly, like technology, assumption that ethics is optional. Okay, and actually, it's not optional. It is an absolute fundamental part of who we are. Ethics shouldn't be trumped by profit or greed or influence. but ethics is a fundamental part of who we are. Another example, in medicine, are we just looking at our body, a biomedical approach, or is there compassion required when we're dealing with human beings as well? Okay, next slide, please, Farwa. Okay, so I've got a couple of real life scenarios here for you to kind of look at. So in medicine, autonomy versus amana, where do we draw the line? If we believe that humans are completely autonomous, then we can decide, to take our own life. And that is the logical conclusion of that. Economics, capitalism versus Zakat's distributive justice. If the goal is only just to profit and make growth your fundamental religion, where does that come to distributive justice in, for example, such as Zakat? So these are assumptions that we find in certain systems and theories. Again, technology, profit versus maslaha. Okay, next slide. We'll go on to the next slide. We'll just quickly wrap up. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up, there is a purpose, and the purpose of our existence is to take on the divine attributes of God, which is ibadah, or align ourselves with divine attributes, and to live a good life, which is developing the virtues of ihsan and bir. And you can find details of the word bir in Surah Baqarah, ayah 172, I think. It's in the notes I've shared with you. And this is all rests on idea of knowledge. So once you gain more knowledge, that actually knowledge is not just about the physical world, but also about the spiritual world, or the non-physical aspects of existence. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Okay, so what I want you to think about is think about your purpose and think, what has been driving you for your purpose, and is it in alignment with the idea of ihsan and Khalifa on earth? Okay. So I've also sent some notes to accompany this presentation. There's a lot more detail that we haven't got time to go into, but ultimately, the main key thing is that this idea of purpose and function is something that we use in science, something we use in economics. It's an agreed part of human thinking. But we don't apply it to humans. In the secular model, we don't apply it to humans. We apply it to everything else apart from humans. But when you apply it to humans, we can see that actually we have a function and purpose as well. And that purpose is to live God's values, to bring beauty into the world, to add value to the world and make the world a better place. And also, our purpose is connected to our journey of life, which carries on beyond our death and be it to the day of judgment till the next life. So this idea of ghaib, that we are completely, this physical existence is only a small part of our real existence. That is a fundamental part of our teleology. Our purpose is not just this world, but the next life as well. Okay, I'm gonna Jazakallah, thank you for listening. It's quite hard talking to a screen, but I like to usually prefer the interactive nature of the sessions. But I hope I've given you a flavor of the idea of teleology and critical thinking, of looking at assumptions. So it's not just about logical thinking, but it's also looking at the underlying assumptions, materialistic assumptions, or reductionist worldview that the only cause and effect that exists is physical cause and effect. But actually, there's spiritual cause and effect as well. So do have a look at the notes I've sent, and I will stop there. And Farwa, over to you. Jazakallah, thank you. May Allah allow us to develop our understanding and help us remember that we are spiritual beings on a journey that started in eternity and will end up in eternity as well.
Jazakallah khair for that. It was very enlightening knowing the three important things in purpose. Along with purpose comes knowledge and virtue as well. There's a first question we have, and it is, what are some tensions between Islam's teleology and scientific worldviews?
Okay, so the first tension is this idea that only the physical world exists. So over the last 100 years, when science kind of really developed, positivism came about, and we said that only what I can observe and see exists. So that's the first tension, that science does not recognize the non-physical, the metaphysical. Um, and that completely then undermines our full human capacity, because then we only see humans as a body, as a physical being. And then this has implications, because if your fundamental analysis is that humans are a physical entity, then all your solutions are going to be physical, and therefore that explains the rise of substance abuse as well. And all our we only believe that only the physical solution can lead to resolving our problems. So that's the first tension. The second tension is that purpose. Science does not look at purpose at all. It's just we explain, and we only explain what we can physically see. And I sometimes use the analogy that science is like somebody, who has a metal detector, and it only says the only thing, only what my metal detector picks up is real. Everything else doesn't exist. And that's a very poor way of looking at the world, because science can't measure everything, just like the metal detector can't pick up diamonds, can't pick up vegetation, animal life, or trees and plants. Uh, so you're missing all of these things. So that tension of missing the non-physical world, and this also leads then to the we privilege mental issues, because we only follow a bit of reasoning, but we don't accept and acknowledge the soul. And if you don't acknowledge the soul, then you have killed all your spirituality. You are basically a human robot, a biological robot. Okay, so that's the main tension, that the science ignores the non-physical aspect of being, and secondly, the science ignores that actually there is a purpose for our existence, and because you've disregarded any non-physical entities such as angels or God or the next life. Therefore, everything else becomes meaningless. Only the physical becomes very important. But the ayah I shared with you in Surah Al Imran, it combines science and spirituality, because it talks about الَّذِينَ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Those who reflect, ponder, which is science. You observe, you notice things, but then that leads you to the conclusion that there's a function, there's a purpose, and this is linked to a higher purpose. Everything has a purpose, therefore I have a purpose as well. And this object in creation, its purpose has been defined by the creator, and therefore my purpose is also defined by the creator. So this leads to the third tension, is science rejects revelation as a source of knowledge. And if you reject revelation as a source of knowledge, then you are unable to access the higher learning. And what is amazing is that every human civilization has agreed upon a higher being, a creator, some concept of afterlife, and that's the common human knowledge. So the collective experience of mankind up until 200 years ago was a confirmed all the non-physical metaphysical aspects, and the last 200 years we've just rejected that completely. Okay, so to summarize then, one, it rejects the non-physical. Two, it rejects the idea of purpose. And three, it rejects the idea of revelation.
All right, they're thanking you for the answer. If nobody else has got a question, I would like to ask a question. You mentioned that how knowledge is very important in purpose. I would like to know, how do we balance between useful knowledge, which is beneficial knowledge in this world, and sacred knowledge in our personal development?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. I think if we look at, I mean, if you look at the premise of your question, that there is practical knowledge and there's sacred knowledge. Okay, so there is worldly knowledge and there's religious knowledge, and actually, all knowledge is knowledge. So even having knowledge of the practical things, it's helping you to achieve a purpose. So it might be to better the world, to bring beauty into the world. So for me, all knowledge is sacred knowledge in that sense, that because it all links back to human purpose, and we can use that knowledge for human purpose. So you can have practical knowledge of how to make the world better, It might be, understanding of agriculture, understanding of society, of education. You can use all of that knowledge, that's practical knowledge, but also is achieving a purpose of helping people become better human beings. So everything that leads to you living a good life and embodying all the virtues and ethics, characteristics that we've been talking about, it's all knowledge. And one of the things that I think that science brought in was this idea of the scientific knowledge and there's other knowledge. In the ayah I mentioned, Al Imran, it's just one knowledge. The sacred and the physical is soul connected. Yeah, the body and the soul is interconnected. Not a separate body and not a separate soul. It's all integrated and interconnected. And this is where Tawheed comes in. Tawheed is integration, bringing everything to oneness. That we are. There's only one oneness, and these are different aspect dimensions of looking at that. So I think even if you're pursuing what you might call secular knowledge, it's actually sacred knowledge because you can put it to good use. It gives you deep understanding of God's creation, and it develops your knowledge. And one of the dangers is that we ignore knowledge um, that is there because we think it's not Islamic knowledge. And what I mean by that is that all knowledge comes from God. Yeah, and God tells us that yeah, وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. They can't grasp God's knowledge, and all knowledge comes from God. So this idea, if it doesn't matter who discovers it, all knowledge, Allah has allowed that knowledge to be given to human beings. So this distinction between sacred knowledge and um, uh, secular knowledge, I think it's false. I think everything is knowledge. Everything, if you approach it with the framework that actually all knowledge is from God, and Allah is revealing Himself both through His book of Revelation and the book of creation. He's revealing Himself all the time, and both of these books are part of Revelation. The universe is God's book of the cosmos. We observe, and all the events, history is also part of God's revelation. So God is revealing Himself. If you don't do that, there is a break between lived experience and real knowledge and just book knowledge, where it's just we think Islamic knowledge is only what you find in books and from a certain particular time period. Actually, Islamic knowledge is living knowledge. Revelation explains reality now, not something that happened 400 years ago. So our revelation and our current context, we use revelation as a lens to see what is happening now. And therefore, looking through that lens makes all knowledge sacred knowledge.
Jazakallah khair for that. That was really good. I really like the part where you connected all knowledge to Tawheed, the oneness. It all comes to one. Jazakallah khair for that. If anyone else has got a question, we've got 10 minutes remaining till the session ends. There's another question where how can teachers and parents instill in youth a love for knowledge that's rooted in purpose and virtue, not just in academic performance, but how to even practice that knowledge and have the love for that knowledge?
Okay, wow, that's a really beautiful question. And it goes to the heart of developing children who are connected to God and people. And I think the way to do it is looking at the Prophet's pedagogy. How did the Prophet ﷺ teach? The Prophet ﷺ taught through experiential learning. Yeah, it wasn't just through a book. It was experiential learning, and um, and and what that does is that we have to base knowledge on our lived experience. Otherwise, it's just theory. Yeah. So first step is that whenever you're surrounded, you ask children to kind of connect and think what they can see from their own lived experience and give them these experiences. So I always mention there's three ways of kind of knowing God, recognizing God. And the first one is nature. You go outdoors. The more time you spend outdoors, you will appreciate, you will develop certain ideas and concepts that will then form the foundation of your knowledge and your spirituality as well. And this idea of spending time in the real world, in nature, in the outdoors, is fundamental to developing a relationship with knowledge of the world as well. because otherwise all you see is we don't actually see things, we don't experience things. I mean, today most people actually just see the world through their screens. They don't actually see the world with their eyes anymore. We see the world through videos that we watch. We don't actually really connect with the world anymore at all. So step one is nature. Take them out in nature, show them things, get them to experience things. And secondly is relationships. Get them to meet people, get them to different people and people that do different jobs, or involve different parts of society, and just developing relationships is the way of really gaining deep knowledge. To be able to understand revelation, you have to understand relationships. Yeah, relationships. And then thirdly is revelation. How do you then connect with revelation? And revelation then gives you the deeper insights that you might not be able to identify on your own, because we're blind to certain realities. We can't see the full spectrum of existence. Just like certain animals can see certain spectrums that we can't see. In the same way, our physical sight is blind to the spiritual realities, and they're there. We don't create them; they're just there. And so, revelation plugs that human blindness and gives us access to things that we can't see. Yeah. So, in terms of developing children's knowledge, it's get them time to spend outdoors, get them time to meet people, develop relationships. You can start with your family, with cousins, with getting them to meet different people, and thirdly, get them to connect with revelation as well. Okay.
Jazakallah khair for that. I think there's one last question, I think, and we'll end with that. Someone has asked any book recommendations for this.
Oh gosh, book recommendations. I think we need to write one. Um, I think the difficulty is that the way we look at Islamic knowledge is very academic, very bookish, and what we really need to do is actually, just to give you like an example, I always give is that how many of the Sahabas were literate, how many of the Sahabas could read or write, on the most generous estimate, probably about 10% of them. Yeah, 124,000, about 10%. Even that's quite very, very high. The 90% couldn't read or write. They never saw a book, never read a book in their lives. Yet they achieved the status of being the greatest human beings. Okay. So what that tells us is that actually knowledge isn't about, we shouldn't be getting just through books. Is again connecting, engaging, establishing this idea that actually God can reveal himself through people, through nature, and through revelation. And so really what they developed a Quranic way of looking at the world through the Quranic lens. Yeah, and that doesn't require academia, doesn't require literary knowledge. It's just that you engage with everything. So you engage with everything, not just books. So the basic answer to that is I wouldn't recommend a book because it takes you away from what we've been talking about. You need to really experience the world, this experiential learning, and the insights come, and God opens those insights to you, because we believe in intuition, we believe in inspiration, we believe in revelation. Okay, and how do we create the conditions to receive all of that? And that can only happen if you allow children to have those experiences, that come through a full life. So the problem we have now in the age of AI and screens and social media is that we don't engage with the real world anymore. We don't engage with, and actually people don't even read books anymore. People don't even read books anymore. They just see things through the screen. And so I think the step one would be just see the world through your own eyes, not through the eyes of a screen, and get your children to see the world. And that way you will develop insights. And then secondly, connect revelation to your lived reality. So the Quran should explain what is happening in your life, what is happening in the world, what is happening in your community. It is a living reality. And so what the Sahabas did is they were able to connect the revelation to their lived experience. Yeah. And that can't happen just by reading a book. Yeah. Okay. So I think, so I can't recommend a book. A, I wouldn't recommend a book. And B, I think we should write one as a manual for kind of achieving this. and let's get together and write one. Right, let's write our own book on this.
Right, then. Jazakallah khair for that. And Jazakallah khair for everyone who joined today. And a very special thank you to you, Ustad Naveed, for gifting us such a rich and thought-provoking, purposeful session on purpose. And we pray that this session has helped everyone regain our hearts with purpose and Allah has created us for, and to live with a life filled with virtue and meaning and pursuit of beneficial knowledge, not just from the books but practice as well. This was our first session from the ongoing series, so please stay connected for more sessions where we will continue to explore more about Islam for critical thinkers. To conclude, let's finish with the words of remembrance of Allah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayk. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير everybody for joining.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakumullah khair, everybody.